All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling a question that's had people scratching their heads for ages. Does quantum mechanics mean we have free will? We've got some wild YouTube videos to unpack, so let's get right to it.
And it gets complicated fast, right? We can't talk about free will without at least mentioning determinism.
True. Okay, imagine a lawyer arguing in court that his client isn't responsible for what he did because you can trace everything back to the Big Bang. Like, it's all just a chain reaction that started billions of years ago, and he had no say in the matter.
That's the core of causal determinism, the universe, playing out like a predictable movie because of the laws of physics. You know, classic Newtonian physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, everything determined.
But then wouldn't that mean even the lawyer's argument was predetermined?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bit of a paradox, right? And to make it even trickier, even classical physics throws us a curveball. We think it's predictable, but then there's stuff like, well, weather patterns. We can forecast the weather pretty well a few days out, but much further than that, it gets messy.
Because a butterfly in Brazil decides to flap its wings, and boom, hurricane in Florida. Is that what we're talking about?
It's a fun saying, but it points to chaos theory. That butterfly effect is how tiny initial changes can spiral into huge unpredictable consequences over time. And it's not just weather. Think leaky faucets, traffic jams, even the stock market.
Wait, a leaky faucet? How's that chaos theory?
Think about it. A perfectly regular drip. You'd barely notice. Totally random drip, same thing. But a chaotic drip. Almost regular, but then it changes. Just when you think you've got it figured out. Unpredictable, super sensitive to tiny changes at the start. Chaos theory.
So chaos theory equals free will. We're all just, victims of cosmic chaos, off the hook for whatever we do.
Whoa, hold on. Chaos theory throws in uncertainty, sure, but it doesn't automatically equal free will. Our brains are still part of this physical world, following those same laws of physics.
Okay, so we can't predict everything perfectly, but even those unpredictable things are still because of how the universe started, right? Where does that leave us?
That's where things get even more interesting. We've looked at how classical physics has its limits in predicting things. But what about when we bring quantum mechanics into the mix? What if the laws that are in charge at the tiniest level actually challenge our whole understanding of cause and effect? Get ready, because things are about to get really, really weird.
Quantum mechanics. All right, I'm ready for things to get weird. It's like the rule book for reality just goes out the window when we start talking about stuff at the subatomic level, right? So how does that change things when we're talking about free will?
Well, it really shakes things up. At that fundamental level, quantum mechanics says the universe isn't deterministic, it's probabilistic.
So instead of this neat, predictable machine, it's more like the universe is flipping coins to figure out what happens next.
Kinda. Not actual coin flips, but yeah, quantum events aren't certain, they're ruled by probabilities. You know about Schrodinger's cat, right?
Oh yeah, the poor cat stuck in the box. 50-50 chance of surviving all because of a single atom, and whether it decays or not. Always felt bad for that cat.
It's a thought experiment, but yeah. What's so crazy is that it shows how, until we actually measure it, the cat is in this superposition, both alive and dead.
Okay, yeah, that's where I have to start concentrating really hard. So until we actually look at the universe, it's all just a big what if.
It's not specifically about a human looking or observing. It's more about the quantum system interacting with any larger system. Like when those particles finally hit the detector in the lab, forcing them to choose a state.
Okay, I think I'm kind of getting it. But does all this randomness at the quantum level actually mean we have free will? If it all comes down to tiny particles acting randomly, does that actually make me in control of my choices?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Even if quantum events are random at their core, it doesn't necessarily mean those events are driven by anything we'd think of as human willpower. Our brains are incredibly complex, but they're still part of the physical world.
So no secret quantum consciousness controlling our decisions then?
Not that we've seen. But hold on, the debate about quantum mechanics and determinism doesn't stop there. We've got even wilder interpretations to consider, like superdeterminism and the many worlds interpretation.
Whoa, those sound intense. What are we talking about with those?
So imagine a universe where even those random quantum events are, well, in a way, already decided. That's superdeterminism. It says that maybe there are hidden variables, things we don't even know about yet, that decide how every event will play out, even at the quantum level.
So even further down the rabbit hole than just quantum randomness. That's a lot. Okay, what about the other one, the many worlds interpretation? That one's always kind of blown my mind, even if it's a little out there.
Okay, so the many worlds interpretation basically says that every time there's a quantum measurement, every single outcome actually happens, but each in its own separate universe.
Hold on. So there's a universe where I had the chocolate ice cream and another where I went with vanilla. Infinite possibilities, infinite mazes. Yeah, I can see how that one's popular.
It's definitely a mind bender, right? But it's really important to remember that these are just interpretations, different ways of trying to make sense of things. No one's decided for sure what quantum mechanics really means yet.
It's crazy. Even if we don't totally get it, the fact that we're having this conversation at all just shows how strange and counterintuitive this stuff really is.
Yeah.
Randomness, maybe hidden variables, infinite versions of ourselves. It's a lot. We've been focusing on the universe as a whole, the really small stuff, but what about us, our brains? Isn't that where free will, whatever it is, would have to be coming from? So we've been talking about all this quantum stuff happening at the smallest level, but we experience the world through our brains, right? Where does the brain fit into this whole free will thing? Is it somehow different from the rest of the universe?
Not really. It's still physical, just like everything else, subject to those same laws. But it's incredibly complex, right? Remember how we talked about chaos theory, tiny changes, big effects? Well, now imagine that with billions of neurons firing.
And to make it even weirder, we're only actually aware of a tiny fraction of what's going on up there. Like our conscious experience is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
Exactly. One of the videos you shared, the History of the Universe one, talked about this thing called blind sight. It's where people with damage to a certain part of their brain can react to things they swear they can't see. They don't know they're seeing something, but they'll still reach for it or walk around it.
Wow, so it's like their subconscious is calling the shots. That's amazing, but kind of creepy too.
Right. It really shows you just how much is happening in our brains that we're not even aware of. And that brings us back to free will, doesn't it? If there's all this stuff going on under the surface, how much control do we really have?
It's almost like our conscious mind is just making up explanations for decisions our subconscious already made. That really makes you question the whole idea of me choosing anything.
Yeah, it's definitely a brain twister. And it's something that physicist Sabine Hassenfelder talks about in her videos about free will.
Yeah, she gets right to the point with those titles. I don't believe in free will, this is why. And you don't have free will, but don't worry. So what does she say?
Well, she says that maybe free will, instead of being this basic thing about the universe, is more like something that comes out of really complex systems like our brains. Think about like conductivity in metals. One electron by itself doesn't really conduct electricity, does it? It's something that happens because of how tons of electrons all behave together.
So you're saying that maybe our sense of free will is kind of like a simplified way for us to experience what our brain's already doing? That's a pretty wild thought.
Exactly. It's constantly processing, reacting, making decisions.
Yeah.
Mostly without us even knowing. And that feeling we have of making a choice. Maybe that's just how we experience all of that complexity.
This deep dive has definitely been thought-provoking. I have to say, though, it's a bit unsettling to think free will might be an illusion. What happens to morality, taking responsibility, our whole justice system, if we don't really have a choice in what we do?
Big questions, for sure. And luckily, those are things that get covered in some of the other stuff you sent, particularly those talks in the book by Sam Harris.
Right. He's got some strong opinions on free will, too. He doesn't seem too worried about it, though.
Exactly. He says that even if free will is an illusion, it doesn't mean our lives are meaningless or that we can't be held responsible for our actions. It's more about, like, a shift in perspective. Instead of thinking about it like, could I have done differently, we focus on the impact of what we do.
So it's more about consequences and how to keep society functioning smoothly.
Exactly. And Harris also points out that thinking this way, where our actions are determined, can actually lead to more compassion. Instead of blaming people for their faults, we can see those faults as coming from things outside their control, like genetics, how they were raised, their environment,
That's a really interesting point. Not about letting people off the hook, but more about understanding and maybe even preventing harm before it happens.
Exactly. And he also says that even if our choices are already made, the experience of going through it all, working towards goals, forming connections, it's all still incredibly valuable.
Well, that's good to hear. It wouldn't be a very fulfilling life if it felt like we were just along for the ride, like watching a movie that's already been made, right?
Exactly. So we might have poked a few holes in the idea of free will with this deep dive, but hey, it also opened up a whole new way of looking at ourselves in the universe.
Totally. From lawyers and the Big Bang to chaos theory, from random particles to the mysteries of the human brain, it's been quite the journey.
And it's not over. What we understand about the universe is always changing. Who knows, our ideas about free will might change right along with it. There's always something new to discover.
That's the beauty of it all, right? We keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep learning. And hey, maybe that's what free will is really about, engaging with the mystery of our own existence. Even without all the answers, the exploration is what makes it so fascinating.